The United Nations World Food Programme has paused aid distribution in one of Sudan's largest camps for displaced people. Fighting in the civil war is worsening in the area. The Zamzam displacement camp is located in the Darfur region and provides shelter to 500,000 refugees. And the UN warns that thousands could starve. War erupted in Sudan in April 2023 because of a power struggle between the Sudanese army and a paramilitary group, the so-called Rapid Support Forces. Now let's hear from Leni Kinzli of the United Nations World Food Programme Sudan. She just got back from Sudan and joins us from Nairobi now. Leni, please spell out what this pause in distribution means to, say, a family that's sought refuge at the Zamzam camp.
It literally means their lives are hanging in the balance. Zamzam is the first place in 7 years that famine has been confirmed. The situation is incredibly dire for families, and they're reliant on food assistance to survive. And that's why we urgently need an end to the fighting and a pause, at the very least, a pause to the fighting there so that we can resume the food distributions as quickly as possible.
Now, why did this interruption of operations happen now?
It happened in recent weeks. There's been an escalation in fighting in Zamzam, and it's basically made it so unsafe that our partners on ground had to evacuate for their own safety. There's been an increase in shelling from the Rapid Support Forces. The market has been burned and destroyed. The images that we were seeing from Zamzam in recent weeks are nothing short of harrowing. And that is why we had to make that decision for the safety of our staff and partners on ground.
Now, Sudan is a huge country, one of the biggest in Africa, and we should remind our viewers that this war and hunger extends far beyond the Zamzam camp. But give us a sense of the scale of Sudan's humanitarian crisis.
Currently, it is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world and the worst hunger crisis. 1 in 2 Sudanese do not know where their next meal will come from. That's 25 million people, a population the size of Australia that is not able to fend for themselves in terms of putting food on their plates. It is catastrophic in Sudan, and it's also spilling across the borders to Chad, to South Sudan. These are countries that are already so vulnerable as well. And that is why there really needs to be concerted international attention to the crisis to bring a solution for, in the first step, a humanitarian pause so we can get to the areas that are hardest hit, like in and around Khartoum, the capital, in the Darfur region.
Now, can you give us a sense about the problems of moving humanitarian aid through this country that is so vast to get the food where it's actually needed?
So as you mentioned, Sudan is a huge country. It's about 3 times the size of France. If we're transporting assistance, let's say from the East Port Sudan, the Red Sea, all the way to the Darfur region, that's 2,000 kilometers. The road conditions are extremely poor. We're driving over desert, in some cases just sand dunes. So that's the first thing, is the physical logistical challenges because of the infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure in Sudan. But then when there is fighting ongoing, when there are active airstrikes and shellings in places where that are embattled, like Khartoum, like Al-Fashir, it is almost impossible to get convoys of aid through. Then again, on these long distances, there are multitudes of checkpoints of armed actors, not just between the 2 main warring parties, the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, but also armed actors on the ground, where on any, just a 500-kilometer stretch of road, we're crossing 50, 60 different checkpoints, different armed actors having to negotiate. So getting convoys of assistance, which is vital, but it's also a key commodity in a war economy, extremely difficult, extremely dangerous. But as WFP, we are not giving up. We are continuing to push as much as possible, as long as we can.
Now, you've touched upon this earlier, but what do you make of the international response to the emergency in Sudan? Is is it getting enough attention? Is the international community doing enough?
The international community needs to be doing more. Many people are calling Sudan a forgotten crisis. It's not forgotten, it's being ignored. And this has wide-reaching implications for the neighboring countries, for the region, for the continent. It really has far-reaching global geopolitical implications. And there needs to be more attention, more coordinated efforts to push the warring parties for, one, a humanitarian pause, to ensure humanitarian access, adherence to international humanitarian law. And we know that the problem is there. And the efforts, the political will behind this need to be there to match the scale of this crisis and really to stand up for the Sudanese people who are bearing the brunt of this 2-year conflict at no fault of their own.
Leni Kinzli there from the United Nations World Food Programme. Thank you very much, Leni.
Thank you for having me.